ASMR Who, and today we're going to be continuing our look through the Big Finish main range. In my last video I talked about Big Finish and their new website launch and new app launch and how it didn't go very well, and I had a couple of problems with it which seemed to be sort of smoothed out. I talked about in that last video not being able to purchase some of the stories we're going to be talking about in this video. That problem seems to be fixed now. I was able to purchase those stories, buy those stories, and download them in my app, and all my other releases that didn't initially transfer over, they're all back now. So I still don't love the new app and I don't love the new website, but I'm sure I'll get used to them in time. I'm sure that the any remaining kinks will be ironed out, and the major problems I have been resolved, which is good to hear. The other topic that we talked about in that video remains uncommented on by Big Finish, but you know, if you're curious as to what that is, go watch that video. But yes, we're talking about another 4 stories in the main range here. So let's crack on. We're starting off with Bang Banga Boom, which is written by Clayton Hickman and Gareth Roberts, who did The One Doctor. And as I no doubt said when I talked about that story, I don't much care for Gareth Roberts and his opinions, his bigoted opinions, his opinions on trans people and such. And so, as is the case, and I will mention this anytime I'm discussing a story where, you know, a credited writer or a credited performer is, you know, maybe not the best as you know, revealed themselves to have less than pleasant views, less than tolerable views, or, you know, if I was to go back and talk about the Christopher Eccleston series, if I was to talk about the episode Boomtown, for example, you know, I would mention Noel Clarke, for example. So any praise for those stories is not praise of those people. That continues to be the case with Gareth Roberts. I don't like the guy, but I did quite like The One Doctor, you may recall. So is this follow-up story as good? Well, it's interesting because both The One Doctor and Bang Banga Boom were Christmas releases, released in December, and were intended to be much more light-hearted and essentially like parody stories. The One Doctor is clearly parodying, I mean, first of all, Doctor Who, but it's also it's very much doing sort of Douglas Adams and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and you know, stuff like that, which I thought it worked quite well at. Bang Banga Boom is primarily parodying the Eurovision Song Contest and Star Trek and I believe Space 1999. The cover, the CD cover artwork is meant to look like, I think it's Star Trek the Motion Picture. The poster for that, the title is a reference to the Eurovision song, winning song from Lulu from 1969, I believe. The song is called Boom Banga Bang. And yeah, this is very much a parody. This is with the 7th Doctor and Mel as opposed to the 6th Doctor and Mel, and I didn't think it was as good as The One Doctor. Not awful, but yeah, I just felt like the characters were very big and very harsh. I did like that the sort of Eurovision commentator character is called Logan, which is like that's very clearly a pun on a sort of play on Terry Wogan, which there was a weird sense of pride I had when I figured that out, because I'm fairly young, and so in my head, Graham Norton is the UK's commentator for the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't really recall watching it when Terry Wogan was the commentator. I don't really watch Eurovision much anyway, occasionally, but you know, I think I was working this year when it was on, so I didn't catch it. Yeah, I just felt that this was a little bit. This was much sillier than the one. I mean, the One Doctor was silly, but in that sort of Douglas Adams sense, whereas that isn't here. And so, you know, I found it a little bit kind of. The twists and turns were a little predictable. There's a twist in the final act that is a little, I found quite predictable. But you know, if it's the thing that stood out to me was that this is 2 stories in a row from Gareth Roberts and Clayton Hickman. An instance. Both in The One Doctor and Bang Bang a Boom, and I don't mean to keep comparing them so much, but they're in the same sort of vein. They're trying to do similar things, so it feels right to compare them, I suppose. And it's the same writers, of course. But in both stories, there's this idea of a character being sort of in having an attraction for and being quite lustful for the Doctor. But I felt it worked in The One Doctor and it didn't in this. Because in The One Doctor, I think it's a more fun dynamic with Colin, who's kind of not really about that and kind of shrugging it off. And you've got I forget what she was, is it Sally Ann, that character who is the sort of fake Doctor's assistant, who, you know, is starting to realise that I think he's called Panto, isn't he? Is you know, just a sleazebag, and he doesn't really care about her. And she starts off as a con artist like him, but spends time with the Doctor. And yes, there is an attraction, a physical attraction to him, because she likes, you know, I think the line is like a guy with a bit of meat on him or something, but she also kind of, it's an attraction born out of his influence on her, and he sort of encourages her to be better, to be a better person. Whereas in this, you've got a character, an alien character, with a really big silly accent, sort of, I don't know, vaguely European, almost like Dracula-esque, who kind of forces the Doctor to motorboat her. Well, not quite, not quite. That's immature of me. But sort of pushes his head into her breasts, and is being very lustful, and then he starts to kind of become lustful, and it's like a pheromones thing. But it just felt very weird. And then what was then weird is that I was going to say imply, but it's not even really an implication. They kind of state that the Doctor is celibate and has been for 900 years, which I think is, I just find odd. It's a weird kind of remnant of the 80s. I find it kind of the entire classic era. But you're not telling me that the third Doctor didn't get down and dirty. Like, come on. Or even some of the others, you know. The Doctor has a genuine kind of romantic relationship, not a kind of a romantic dynamic with a character travelling. The Doctor's got a granddaughter, so that the celibacy idea I just think is a bit weird and a bit limiting. And I think especially when the previous Seventh Doctor story is the Rapture, where they talk a lot about casual sex, the two things just kind of don't quite mesh, which is not to say that you should be beholden to other stories necessarily, but it just didn't quite work for me. So it was okay, it was fun, bang bang a boom. It was the story I was looking forward to, because I remember from just seeing the title and the image, I was like, oh, that looks very interesting, but it was okay. The other thing to note is that starting with this story, this release, we get the Doctor appropriate themes for the story. So whereas previously they were using like the standard, I forget the names of the composers, the standard like Tom Baker theme, starting from this story, McCoy gets is it Kev McCulloch? His theme. Davison gets the 80s theme, and Colin gets the Trial of a Time Lord theme, which is one of my favourites. But yeah, that's Bang Bang a Boom. It was decent. Then we move on to another story I was very much anticipating, Jubilee, written by Robert Sherman. The thing that this story is most known for is that it became Dalek. It's a story that got adapted into Dalek, and although people will say that, well, it's not that much like Dalek, aside from the sort of initial premise of there's a single Dalek locked up and a brief conversation with the Doctor, they're actually very different, is what people will say. I don't think they are that different. Like, they are in terms of the actual plot, but thematically, I think they're very, very similar in terms of what the point of the Daleks is. I don't know which I prefer, because the TV story Dalek is a great story, but it's not one when I think of, like, some of my favourite stories. I don't think of Dalek, even though it is fantastic. But I do think that the actual premise of a single Dalek that's locked up in Jubilee is a survivor of a Dalek invasion that was thwarted. But I think the premise works a lot better in Dalek, because you've got the Time War, where it's like, this isn't just the last Dalek from an invasion fleet, this is the last Dalek in the universe, it's the last Dalek in existence, and the whole idea of it's not had any orders and it needs orders, it makes even more sense, and it kind of fits even better with the whole Time War thing. It's interesting that this story specifies that the self-destruct mechanism was disabled, so it couldn't kill itself, it just had to keep living. But that's not in the TV story, where it does self-destruct, but I assume that, like, it just got broken, and then when it fixes itself up by downloading the internet or whatever, then it forgets. Yeah, I'm not sure. But it's interesting that the audio story explains that, but the TV story didn't. And it made me think, oh yeah, I've never considered that in the TV story. Not that it's a problem necessarily. But Jubilee is another Rob Sherman story with a great reputation, and you can see why, because it's fantastic. Evelyn gets lots of fun stuff to do here. The Doctor gets fun stuff to do. It has a lot to say about the Daleks as characters and the Daleks as merchandise, which is very interesting. And although they are quite different, I think it is fair to compare this to the TV story Dalek, and I kind of think that this is better. And it's not that the TV story's bad, or the novelisation, although I didn't much care for the novelisation when I read it. Maybe I need to give it another go. I think what maybe doesn't quite work about Dalek compared to some of Rob Shearman's other Doctor Who work that I've experienced, this story and Chimes of Midnight and stuff, and Holy Terror, is that Rob Shearman has got such a dark sense of humour that you can't really do any of that on TV. The TV story Dalek is not a very funny story. It has some moments of humour in there, but it's not funny like Rob Shearman's other stories, because the humour's so dark that you just couldn't do it on TV. There's some dogs barking, if you can hear them. Oh, that is quite loud, isn't it? But yeah, I really enjoyed Jubilee. The dark moments are really effective. It's wickedly, twistedly funny. It's a great Dalek performance from Nicholas Briggs. He's kind of doing a Mondasian Cyberman intonation, but for a Dalek, which is weird. Which I think, had I listened to this before World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls, I wouldn't have thought about that. But having heard Nicholas Briggs do Mondasian Cybermen, it's a similar kind of intonation with this, which is kind of interesting. Evelyn has a similar role to what Rose does in the TV story, and challenges the Doctor and his ideas about the Daleks in a similar way. I think all that stuff, again, works a lot better in the TV story. I think both versions have pros and cons, but it's fantastic, and I think that, yes, even though you can see how this became that TV story, if you haven't listened to this, then yeah, you should, absolutely, because it is a great story, and it's different enough, and it's saying something different ultimately from the same starting point. Yeah, it's really, really good, and another Rob Shearman story that had a strong reputation and didn't disappoint. Moving on to another a more infamous Big Finish story, Necromantia. This is written by Austin Atkinson, which is not a name you will recognise because he only has the one credited Doctor Who story. It's this one. The reason for that is because Big Finish asked Peter Davison, asked Big Finish, has requested that they never hire this man to write again. It's not a great story, and it's not a story that was received well by fans. I think at the time and since. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's quite dark and I think mean-spirited, really. I think I'm probably going to throw up a content warning at the start of this video, which should have happened, and that one in the description as well, I think. A kind of a trigger warning, because if you're not aware, and I'm just going to talk about in this story, because if you're cherry picking what to go for, I don't recommend this one. This story features Erimem. It's a Fifth Doctor, Perry and Erimem story. Erimem, the new companion, introduced in Eye of the Scorpion, and then was in Church and the Crown. So this is her third story, and she gets sexually assaulted, essentially. There is an implication that she is going to be raped. It's sort of implied later that she didn't get raped and she kind of fought off the guy. But that doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't excuse putting it in the story for the sake of, I don't really know, because then that tries to, I don't want to keep saying it, is then kind of, I don't know that you would say redeemed at the end, but he doesn't get a comeuppance, and he has a triumph over one of there's a couple different sort of villainous aspects. Well, yeah, the sort of the villain, he gets the comeuppance, he gets the victory over. The villain who never interacts with the Doctor. There's a pointless subplot. Not pointless, but not engaging. So this character who does this horrible thing to Harriman, or at least, has intent. He sends his assistant out of the room and he's like, I haven't had a woman for some time, or whatever. And then it cuts away, and then the next we see Harriman, she's kind of obviously shaken and not right. But then it's like, I gave as good as I got. He tried, but it's also never stated whether or not, I don't want to trivialize it, being like, oh well, it's never said if he did or didn't rape, because it's not the point. The point is not, did he do it or not? The point is, why did you put this in the story? Why is it there? Why would you do that to the companion? And is it necessary for the story? No. Is it necessary for the character? No. Especially if you're not going to then make the character totally irredeemable villain. And even then, even if you are going to do that, rape is not a necessary story device. It's not right, and it's not pleasant to listen to. And it's disappointing. I know it's something that is kind of common with Doctor Who in the Wilderness. Not common, but it's something that I think crops up more times than you would expect in children's television show Doctor Who in the Wilderness years, when adults got their hands on it, in terms of like they were basically the only fans, was all the adults who had liked it previously, and so it became more mature. But I know I think there's a Virgin New Adventures novel where rape what am I saying? Where Ace gets sexually assaulted, and the Doctor tells you have to respect the time period you're in or something. It's just really horrible, and just kind of makes me feel a bit dirty and slimy. It's not good. So it's this story's bad for that reason. Also, because it's just like really aggressively kind of violent in a mean-spirited way, in that the episode 2 cliffhanger, the Doctor gets beheaded. He gets his head torn off by witches and they feast on his flesh and he dies, which is just weird and gross. And the solution to that is that he's like kind of spends most of the next part in like a weird afterlife where he's sort of dead but he's not dead, and then this force creates a copy of his body for him, so I guess he does die, and the Doctor we've been following after this point is a clone. Stupid, bad, not necessary, mean-spirited, and aside from that, the story's not very engaging. Oh yeah, Perry gets drugged and strips naked, and she's going to be a sacrifice. Like, everyone gets treated badly, and the story's not engaging. I couldn't really tell you what it's about. Some witch cult thing, I don't know. It's not good. It's probably the worst story I have listened to so far. I don't know if it's the one I was the least engaged. Like, I think been stories I've been less engaged with because I've just found them more boring. But this one is more like actively bad. So, and then finally, we're going to talk about The Dark Flame, which is written by Trevor Baxendale, another one like Gareth Roberts, with bigoted views, transphobic views. I do not agree with, I do not condone. And I know it's something that people have been upset that he's continued to work with Big Finish more recently. And like Doctor Who magazine and stuff. I talked about this in the previous Big Finish video. This is kind of within the Virgin New Avengers continuity. You've got Lisa Bowerman as Bernice Summerfield again, who's in Shadow of the Scourge, the Paul Cornell Hotel one. So this is sort of another sidestep story. But I like Bernice. I like Benny. From the very little I've heard, but I think Lisa Bowerman's fun. She's got a kind of a wit to her, and they kind of play on that in this story where, she makes witty comments about making witty comments. Yeah, this was decent. This is about a cult and followers of this cult of the Dark Flame and stuff. And they want this artifact. But I can't say I have too much to say about it. And I listened to it today. I listened to it a couple of hours ago, and I couldn't really tell you specifically, what it's about. I thought the villain was a decent presence. Like there was a good threat. The way they threaten characters and the way they influence characters, and there's a moment in part 4 where the Doctor gets, sort of like that moment in Pyramids of Mars where Sutekh makes the Doctor kneel and he's sort of cowering before him. There's a moment like that in here, which is good fun. But yeah, it's I would say unremarkable is the word. I thought the dialogue was quite fun. There was a good line from the Doctor that I can't remember now, but I know I liked it. Let me think. Well, is it going to come back to me? Oh yeah. He says, I think Benny says something about the web of time, and his line is something along the lines of, the web of time will be fine. I'm more worried about the spider, which I thought that was a fun line, a fun moment. And there's good moments in this. Ace gets some fun stuff to do, but then she also has an off-screen fight. It's audio, so it's all off-screen, but you know what I mean. It did very much feel like a TV story in that there's a lot of back and forth between the same 3 locations. And I was listening to it like, well, I can kind of picture this as a 1980s production where you've got like 3 sets in the corner of a studio that you go in between, for 20 minutes. So in that way it kind of fit in the mould of a Doctor Who story, but this is the most unremarkable story of the 4 we talked about today, I think. It's not the worst, but it's not a story that I think is going to really stick with me. Which I'm finding more and more as I listen to Big Finish, as I listen to more stories. I'm able to more pinpoint, which ones work for me and which ones don't, and sometimes that is only like a week or so after the fact where I can still recall elements of stories or even just feelings of stories, has stuck with me, the one that continues to surprise me even now, is Phantasmagoria, the second story, which I still remember how I felt listening to that story, and the vibe of that story, and the twists and turns of that story, and I listened to it months and months and months ago, and I've only listened to it once, and I didn't expect that much from it, but it is stuck with me, so, but yeah, those are the 4 stories today. Getting close to the big 50. These were a mixed bunch, I think, more so than a couple of the previous sort of batches of 4 that we've looked at. I think it's kind of no surprise. My order is Necromantea, my least favourite. Then I would probably say it's hard to differentiate between Bang Bang and Boom and the Dark Flame. It's to like which one I preferred, which one I'd rather watch again, listen to again first. But Jubilee is, of course, the standout here. But yeah, those are the stories again. Don't mistake my anything positive I say about stories be praise for Gareth Roberts or Trevor Baxendale. But yeah, other than that, this has gone on. It's been a bit of a longer one than I anticipated. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. And I will see you all next time for the next batch of 4, starting with, and I'm very excited for this one, Doctor Who and the Pirates, or The Last That Lost a Sailor. Thank you.